So good afternoon, everybody that's here bang on time. I'd just like to make a practical announcement. We'll actually start for real in about 10 minutes when the Dutch minister is able to make it back here, so we start all together. He's actually got to formally open another session that starts at 4 o'clock, say a few words, and then he'll come straight here. So we'll give him that time to get here rather than so he can join at the beginning. If he's delayed, we'll start anyway, but we'll give him the opportunity of being here at the beginning. In the meantime, feel free to come up and talk directly with the panelists who are all ready to have direct conversations with you. So don't be shy. And we have this format where we're surrounded, so we're all together, we're all equal. So please feel free.
Oh. For me too. No, no. Yes.
Apparently, on where is it? I felt much better.
So, yes, no, I had a meeting and
Is that,
I missed it. As research.
Sorry.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being patient. The Minister hasn't quite joined us, but he's going to be here any minute. But we don't want to lose the time for your involvement in joining the discussions. So, as you've seen from the introduction to the session on the web, our starting point is that making well-considered decisions on infrastructure financing is now absolutely crucial to improving equity, helping to meet climate policy goals, and bringing economic gains. And we need to mobilize very large amounts of public funding now if we're going to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the goals of the Decade of Action for Road Safety, and the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And we're fortunate to have, well, we will have 5 people who are involved in innovating in investment in clean transport, safe roads, and equitable mobility, and each ready to discuss some of their recent initiatives. So I'd like to introduce Agustin Calatayud, who's, amongst other things, group head in the Inter-American Development Bank, based in Bogota at the moment. Nika Henry, who's head of the relatively new United Nations Road Safety Fund. Rob McInerney, who's CEO of IRAP, the International Road Assessment Program, Assessment for Road Safety, and Patrick Wendeler, who's CEO of BP Europa, so responsible for Europe and also directly for Germany. And we will have very shortly, I think he's just coming through the door now. This is like the awards at Hollywood. And here is our minister from the Netherlands, Kies van der Berg. Welcome with impeccable timing. Well, there at the back. So we have this nice session where we're surrounded, which is designed to facilitate interaction. So we will try and get you in. If you really urgently want to come into the discussion before I bring you in, then just start waving your hand and I can always bring you in. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'll take the discussion through the key areas, through road safety first, climate change, and then equitable mobility. And I think we'll see as we go, there's important synergies between the three. And so let's start the ball rolling with road safety. So I'd like to kick off with you, Rob. And yeah, as you pointed out to me several times, major investments is needed to cut road deaths, cut them in half this decade, which is the objective of the UN's Decade of Action. And IRAP has been instrumental in a rapid development of results-based finance for road safety. And I think if you can start by telling us a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, and good afternoon, everyone. IRAP's a charity that's been working for over 20 years now on the infrastructure road safety story. For those of you familiar with Euro NCAP, looking at the star ratings of vehicles, IRAP looked at how can we build that same objective safety measure and performance standard for road infrastructure. And that included star ratings for pedestrians, for cyclists, for motorcyclists, and for vehicle occupants. So looking at all road users and being able to provide an indication of how safe that infrastructure is for them. One of the important things we did with the OECD's help is we've actually published the relationship between star ratings and the crash costs per kilometre travelled. Now, what that work found is that on a 1-star road, you'll have crash costs up at this level. If you can bring a 1-star road to 2-star, you actually halve the levels of crash costs per kilometre travelled. You can halve it again to 3-star, halve it again to 4-star, and approaching zero, vision zero, if you can hit 5-star infrastructure for each of those different road user groups. So that really gave us the two elements of the picture. One is the objective measure of the safety performance of road infrastructure, but also an understanding of the economics, that it was high return on investment. In some cases, internal rates of return of 30% plus would come from bringing a road that was 1- and 2-star up to 3-, 4- or 5-star standard. And so That work's now been extended to more than 110 countries around the world that are partnering with IRAP at the government level, at the MDB, Development Bank level, NGOs and others, to actually roll this program out. More than 3 million kilometres of roads have been assessed worldwide. More than $95 billion of investment has been influenced and made safer by using this information. What that then led to was the confidence of the United Nations member states to establish 2 global road safety performance targets. Number 1, target 3, that all new roads should be built to a 3-star or better standard for all road users. Pretty simply, remember those costs? We can't afford to build any brand new 1- and 2-star roads. So that gives us the platform to make sure new roads are built well. Target 4 is that 75% of travel for each road user group should be at that same 3-star or better standard. So what those 2 give us that have now been translated into national policies by governments around the world is the framework and foundation for results-based financing. And that gives us the policy target, but then that can come down to corridor level investments. And that might be 5-star cities, where we're looking at 5-star for pedestrians and cyclists around transit points. It could be taking a 1- and 2-star highway up to 4- and 5-star standard and being able to provide this benchmark for safety that has a pass mark now. And what's been exciting lately in the results-based financing world is we're seeing governments with their own national investment actually being really motivated. Like, give someone a target, they can hit it. So if they've designed the road and are seeing that it's about to be 1- or 2-star, and if they do add barriers or they add a sidewalk, they add raised platform crossings, suddenly it's hitting 3-star. And they say, how can I get to 4? How can I get to 5? So globally, we're seeing results-based financing actually enabling this to happen, where road safety is the metric, not just travel time. And that gives us a way to scale up this investment. So we've been working with the World Bank, the IFC and the IDB, particularly in Brazil, where we're seeing this roll out in a practical sense in concession road investments, where we're seeing a concessionaire being given star rating targets as part of their concession. And they're incentivised to bring and hit those targets early in the concession so that those safer roads are there for their customers as early as you can possibly make it. And having done that, they're also incentivising it by giving them either a greater share of the toll revenues, a potential extension on the concession period, or in terms of the IFC, reductions in like 25 or 50 basis points in the interest rates on the credit that they're taking on to build that infrastructure. So at the end, you end up with a safer road, a viable financial model to deliver it, and results-based financing that leaves everyone a winner.
Yeah, this is very much tapping into the environmentally sustainable finance sector. And I think you've developed that further with the issue of a bond with the World Bank last year as a novel financing instrument to bring even more private capital into investing in road safety. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, how that worked?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the success of green financing and climate bonds, really all we're trying to do is, can we create that same mechanism for the scaling of this proven investments in safer road infrastructure and other road safety improvements as well worldwide. And so the World Bank's leading the way with their road safety bond, the European Investment Bank with sustainability-linked financing, the Inter-American Development Bank also in this space. Groups like the Millennium Challenge Corporation and Africa 50 are also looking at impact investing. But put simply, if you think about it, what we're looking at is, can we quantify the true human cost of road trauma? So we've been working with the Transport Accident Commission in Australia. They're a monopoly insurer. So everybody who is killed or injured in a road crash, regardless of blame, is covered by them. That means I can tell you how many brain injuries happen in Australia and the true cost at the trauma centre and in the total lifetime care of that person. So to give you a personal example, Chelsea was 5 years old when she was hit by a four-wheel drive vehicle. She suffered severe brain injuries. Her parents didn't know if she would survive at all. And after 5 months, they could only really express their hope in terms of she was making progress every day. Chelsea's cost on the health system and on the insurance system will be lifelong. Now, to put it in perspective, there is 3,200,000 Chelseas every year, severe brain injuries and brain injuries from road trauma. 7,200,000 limb fractures are happening each and every year on the world's roads. Basically, today, 100,000 people will be injured on the world's roads. That will lead to an additional $6.2 billion of costs on the health and insurance sector of the future. So the key part that we're doing, that building block, together with the results-based financing, we can now sort of look at how many brain injuries will get reduced when we go from 1-star to 3-star. If we're looking at active mobility, what happens when we can build a cycling superhighway like Bogota and build that in, and what is the reductions in brain injuries, quadriplegia, spinal fractures, and all those other injury types. When we can understand those costs, they can actually form the shadow toll for these results-based financing, impact investing, sustainability-linked financing. So picture this, you've got a dangerous 1 or 2-star road for pedestrians or cyclists or vehicle occupants. You can measure how many deaths and injuries you're going to save. You can measure where those costs are in the health system. You can mobilise those savings into a dividend stream that supports the upfront capital investment in the infrastructure. So in other words, the savings to the health and insurance sector is used to finance the upgrade to the infrastructure that's got an internal rate of return of 30% or better. There's not too many pension funds that wouldn't jump at 30% returns. So if we get this right, we could roll it out as a 5-star city around transit. We could roll out a Footpaths for Africa impact bond. We could roll out and take out 1- and 2-star highways and make them 4- and 5-star in a very viable and cost-effective way that's bringing sort of forward those long-term savings into dividend streams to support the upfront capital. We get that going, pension funds will want more and more, which means we'll upgrade more and more roads, we'll save more and more lives, and again, everyone will be a winner.
Okay, Rob, you've touched on something that everybody's going to be involved here from Patrick on the kind of framework he needs to make investments. You've just set out the kind of stable framework that could generate this kind of investment. Agostina, you're involved in this space. You're going to want to come into it. Tomorrow we have a session, tomorrow afternoon, with Saeed, who's in the audience, talking about the sheer scale of the costs involved and the potential to take that burden out of the economy. But first of all, Neka, you're in this space as well. You're responsible for the UN Road Safety Fund, which was set up specifically to accelerate progress to meeting the Sustainable Development Goal target of cutting trauma in half on the road. So can you give us an idea of the infrastructure-related requests that you're receiving now for funding? From which countries, what reasons? Take us down to the ground. What does this really turn out to in terms of projects? And are there any trends that you can already identify of where the greatest needs are?
Great, thanks a lot, Stephen. So before going down to the ground, just to mention that the big picture, the Chelseas of this world that Rob just spoke about, 93% of them are living in low and middle income countries. I know Chelsea probably is in Australia, but we have the majority of these situations happening in developing countries. And so that's why 5 years ago, the fund was set up to really figure out how can we channel a lot of this, great knowledge, expertise, and ideas financing as well to where arguably it's most needed, these low and middle income countries. And so this is what the fund has been working on for the last 5 years, really trying to find useful ways that we can channel this kind of expertise to low and middle income countries. And to your question about what kind of requests we're getting related to infrastructure, because of the type of funding, the size of funding that we have at the fund, which is quite minimal compared to what the banks have access to, we are working on the soft side of the infrastructure story, equally important. And here, this is where we see requests coming in for capacity building around legislations that are appropriate, around safe road design, around how do we do things like the IRAP star rating program. A lot of the requests are going increasingly in the direction of protecting the vulnerable road users. So you talked about the cyclists and the pedestrians and the footpaths. We see that coming through in the requests that we're getting for support from countries. In the last 2 years, I would say about 30% of the requests that we got were related to these kind of soft infrastructure requests. Because of the size of funding that we have at the fund, we could only respond to less than 1% of these kinds of requests. So right now we have about 6 projects, mostly in Africa, but we also have some in Asia, which are asking for support on this issue around soft infrastructure. So we even have IRAP as one of the partners working in Tanzania, for example, with IRF on the 10-step program. But we also have projects in most of the East African countries reclaiming streets for pedestrians and cyclists, and in Philippines looking at school zones, also in Zambia as well. So really a good range, including Colombia as well. So a good real global range coverage in terms of the support that we're providing. So I think it's not even a question of who's asking. It's really a question of how. A lot of people want to be, having the kind of infrastructure that we see in developed countries. But the question is how. A lot of it has to do with finance, but more than that, it's really the soft side. What does safe roads look like? What does a 3-star road look like? What do we need to do? Who do we need to have around the table? And those are the kinds of conversations that we have through our projects to help developing countries with these issues.
Yeah, and what you call soft infrastructure is capacity development, which, the banks do. And for me, it's absolutely crucial. And I know there's always a tension that the money should go to actually concrete in the ground. And the banks can't do as much capacity building as I'm sure they'd like to do. So it's a fantastic compliment that you're adding this. And I guess you're working with the development banks as well on some projects.
Yes, absolutely. The fund itself is a global partnership. So it's not just about UN agencies. IRAP is a partner. We've got, NGOs like in Colombia, WRI, we have AIP Foundation, but also we have GRSF, for example, sitting on our steering committee. So we do have this kind of global engagement where it's very much trying to find the right expertise to help us to solve the challenges that our developing partners are facing.
And from the projects that you've been working on so far, does that tell us about the future, where you think the biggest opportunities lies, where you can make the biggest difference most quickly?
Well, generally speaking, the biggest opportunity is in the low and middle income countries on many fronts, on many topics, including on the road safety issue. That's where the biggest numbers are. So if we can tackle that and bring those numbers down, that's the biggest opportunity. But in terms of the thematic opportunities, I would say, things like, shared mobility or really looking at protecting spaces for vulnerable road users. These kinds of issues, I think, are important for as the biggest opportunities, including the use of technology. I'm sure Rob knows more about this, but there's great technology out there. I just spoke to a company now talking about how you can map the hotspots so you can do safe infrastructure around the data. And using technology to protect people and do safe design. Data is also a big issue as well that we need to work on, by the way, across the board for many development issues, including this one.
And how does this play out with the big picture in Africa and developing countries more generally in terms of their equity, which is a biggest part of the agenda that they face? How does it play out in terms of the synergies from the specific work you're doing on road safety?
Well, I think safety is fundamental, is foundational to this issue of equitable mobility because it goes to the heart of, transport being accessible and inclusive. It also goes to the heart of, the economic side of economic well-being because as Rob has pointed out, if we can get the fatalities and the injuries down, that is a huge economic benefit to the global community. And of course, there's a public health benefit as well, because if you integrate safety into this whole discussion, then we have fewer fatalities and certainly fewer injuries, which in many cases cost more, unfortunately, than even a fatality. It's hard to look at it that way, but these are the realities that we face.
And if I may, Agostina, you must want to come in on some of the points that Rob and Nico have raised.
Hello. Yes, no, for sure. You were asking about how road safety comes together with promoting equality in our cities, and this is something that is at the heart of what the IDB is doing in Latin America and the Caribbean. We work closely with IRAP as well. So one thing that we like to say in this type of conferences is that we talk a lot about decarbonization, right? But what we think is that decarbonization gives us the opportunity to stop and think that this is not the mobility we would like to see in our cities. We should provide a better mobility, and a better mobility for our citizens is one that provides access to jobs, to healthcare, to education, through the public services or through the transportation that works better in a city and for the public good. And for sure, those tends to be public transportation and active mobility. But in order to encourage active mobility, we need our roads to be safe. Nobody wants to be on a bicycle when there are going to be a high risk for having a traffic incident. So for us, decarbonization, and I'm sure you are going to ask us later, Steve, about decarbonization because it's the topic of this summit, and it's a great topic. But it puts us a call for action as policymakers, development organizations, to rethink mobility, and that mobility is one that promotes equity, that promotes safe mobility, and it's a sustainable mobility, but from an integrated point of view.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues about the work that you do is delivery. And I think top of your agenda at the moment is how you ensure that the projects that you fund are transparent and accountable and actually responsive to local needs. I mean, can you tell us how you achieve that?
So local needs, and just to take perhaps a point of view that might not be taken by other actors and other colleagues in this panel, is involving the civil society and civil society organizations. And I know that in this forum, which is very interesting, we do have a participation from different civil society organizations. And in multilateral development banks, MDBs, IDBs, apart from them, and for people that don't know what the IDB is, we work with Latin America and the Caribbean countries. And in all of our projects, it's embedded in our nature that we work with civil society to understand what they need, to customize solutions to their needs, and also to build long-lasting solutions. And going back to road safety, we are working with the Mexican government right now. The Mexican government recently passed a law on road safety, and that mandates to develop a national strategy. And in order to develop that national strategy, we are conducting workshops throughout the country. Mexico is very big, but we want to have the vision, the perspectives from local governments, from academia, civil society, and also the private sector, so that national strategy can reflect the interest and also the perspective from different point of view, and that can be also a long-lasting solution.
And it's actually very good that you're able to take that approach and touch every level of society, because I know in Mexico, the central government has passed this law, but has not provided funding to implement it, and they're leaving it to the states to actually implement it. And I think they definitely need your assistance in doing that. I mean, more generally, where are your priorities in promoting adoption of clean, efficient technologies that are safe and equitable? I mean, what's the philosophy of the bank overall?
So, just not to repeat myself, that would be promoting more on sustainable mobility, not just a technological change, but if we go particularly to promoting a technological change, which is electric mobility or other ways to replace internal combustion engine vehicles by other with other more sustainable fuels. What we do, I usually say that we provide a 360 solution as an NDB, because we help them develop the soft infrastructure, all the regulations that are needed, so that then we create the enabling environment for the private sector to come and invest. We also develop the pipeline of projects, help the countries develop pipeline of projects so that these can be presented for being financed. And we also provide financing. But when we provide financing, we do that to those projects that have the highest social and environmental standards, and as well to those that can be pilot projects and demonstrate that the technology or the change can work and reduce the risk for the private sector then to come in and invest. And finally, we of course work on research and dissemination. We think, again, talking about electric mobility in this case, we work throughout the supply chain with the energy people, because the clean energy needs to be there, and up to the industrial policy, so that the national and the domestic supply can be there to supply those vehicles when we start this transition.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's go to the Minister, to energy, and then back to what you're doing on electrification. You set that up beautifully, accidentally. So, Minister Kees, the Netherlands actually has a very strong track record, both in terms of planning and developing incentive frameworks that work for business. I mean, you've got a reputation of being green, but business friendly at the same time. And, it's something that I think needs to be emulated. As with road safety, you have been consistently one of the front runners, and I think there's probably a lot that other countries can learn from your experience, but also from the challenges that you're facing at the moment.
And we can tell something about the developments in the Netherlands, because we were a front runner when it comes to road safety, because of the not the soft side but the hard side of the infrastructure, the way we invest in new infrastructure. Well, social costs were part of the cost-benefit analysis, so the cost of injuries, casualties was part of the cost-benefit analysis. So from the 1970s until, well, I think 10 years ago, the curve of the number of casualties was declining very fast. So it's the good news. And everybody knows that investing in road safety it creates the most value of money when it comes to mobility. So there's no doubt about it. And still, also in the Netherlands, there's discussion about investing in road safety. But like I said, in the Netherlands, the curve is not going down anymore because of active mobility of the older elderly people using e-bikes, speed pedelecs, etc. So we have to reinvent and renew our policy. And again, also when it comes to the hard infrastructure at local governments, well, they have to do the same as we did when it comes to our national network. So investing in the infrastructure, it must be safe infrastructure. So we support local governments, but it's not only as you say, it's the heart of the soft part of infrastructure. Also the soft part, the behavior of the people. It's good that older elderly people stay active. And it's good that we say, well, what's the right mobility of the right place in the cities. We have to promote active mobility, but by promoting active mobility, because it's good for health, it's good for participation, it's good for the livability of the cities, we'll also have to reinvent and renew our policy when it comes to safety. So I think, yes, we had a good track record, but we have to reinvent, and maybe we can learn from other countries, also in low and middle income countries, what we can do on the soft side. So I think we have to join forces, share knowledge. At the COP28 of 27, sorry, we launched the idea of sharing knowledge on road safety across low middle income countries and, for example, the Netherlands. But maybe we also should launch a new initiative to have new funding for road safety, because it's essential. It's essential for keeping the society mobile. As if we don't, it would be a pity.
And I think it works both ways, actually. I remember a session in the US where the situation, they have a much weaker road safety culture and experience than the Netherlands. And they were looking at what can they learn from the Netherlands that they could apply in the US. But some of the situations in the southern, more rural areas are much more suited to learning lessons from developing country situations where you have a more similar mix of usage, more similar infrastructure.
I think when it comes to infrastructure, 7 days ago, I went cycling in the Netherlands. Of course, we all have 3 bikes, so everybody to 3, 4 bikes, no problem at all. And I drove 80 kilometers with my bike. I never crossed another road. There were no traffic lights. So, and it was in the western part of the Netherlands, near Rotterdam. So the infrastructure is not the problem. The problem is the behavior of the people, and to train the elderly to how to fall, how to stay on the bike, the behavior to take care for each other. So that is the issue is not, of course, local governments have to invest in safe infrastructure, but the issue in the Netherlands is the behavior side. So, and then I think there we can learn from each other.
And then back on the infrastructure finance side, I think you're looking at introducing a new global active mobility funding mechanism.
Well, we would like to push that forward, because I think when it comes to investing in making investments that are really value for money, well, that would, as the Netherlands, if we can help pushing such a fund or an active, because it's a combination of stimulating active mobility. It's good for health. It's good for the livability in the cities, but it should be accompanied by safety measures. So if we can combine all those values and also stimulate it with a kind of fund, an active mobility fund, or maybe that would be a way forward. So if we, as the Netherlands, can play a part in it, we will be very pleased to play an active role in that. But we need the support of everybody here.
Excellent, Agostinho. If this fund gets established, how are you going to make use of it?
You put me on the spot here, Steve. Of course, we, as an MDB, we promote sustainable mobility, active mobility being part of it, and there are so many needs in the countries that we work in, infrastructure, also regulations, but also working with the behavior. And for that, behavior needs also institutions that can issue regulations, that can enforce regulations. And so, for sure, we need investments, but we also need, as the minister rightly said, we need to put together different components that will make any investment be a good value for money, so that then we have the roads, but the people are incentivized. They want to use them because they feel safe and they feel have the value, they think about the value of using a bicycle instead of a motorcycle, for example.
Nico or Rob or the World Bank, do you want to put in a bid for this fund before it's created?
Absolutely. But I didn't want to diverge too much from the topic, but just to concur that, we have to look at this as an ecosystem issue. And I'm happy that there's so many adjectives in the title because it's never just one thing. I wanted to briefly mention that as part of the UN Global Plan for this decade of action on road safety that I think Rob mentioned, it's not just about infrastructure, but that's absolutely critical. And we know that's a huge issue, but it's also about vehicle safety. It's also about road user behavior. It's also about effective post-crash care. And as you said, rightly said, institutional reform. A lot of what is absolutely critical is building that local expertise in the country, because this parachuting thing that we've had for decades in development assistance is not sustainable. It doesn't work. So how do we really build and transfer in a sustainable way this knowledge and expertise locally on all the issues?
Yeah, and what I'd add to that is, like an active mobility fund, for example, if you've got a public transport system in a city and the active mobility fund helps transit-orientated development that delivers 5-star journeys for the pedestrians and cyclists to each and every transport hub, what a great outcome that would be. And that would create both demand and the benefits, and you'd end up with 5-star livable cities, which become a key legacy of an active mobility fund.
Patrick, time we turn back to private, what the private sector can do in this huge amount of investment needs to be done. Of course, you need a framework where you can make those investments. Perhaps you could set out a bit what you need from government and from the international community, but particularly government with a minister on the spot, to make things work for you.
This is my wish list now. Well, starting at a high level, it really is policy and frameworks that drives demand for low carbon, that drives supply for low carbon, and helps to bridge that gap to the fossil equivalent world. That's what we need. And we need demand certainty as much as we can to be able to calculate the investment. This is, for example, through mandates. ZAF is a good example. We touched briefly in one of the other panels on it. 6% by 2030. And that's something that we can calculate and build upon. Supply and demand works in EV. So we're seeing that trajectory on the back of those incentives that we're putting in. And there's a lot of growth. So that is an example where it works. We need policy and frameworks that are easy, or I should say easier than the ones that we have, without having to hire a lot of people to help interpret these policies and what they actually mean. And there's good examples in the world as well, Ira, we talked a bit about. And that's really important. And then lastly, I'd say that we need policy and frameworks that don't discriminate. Some technologies that are secure, that are available, and that are low carbon and affordable. So I'll give an example. HVO is a hydrotreated vegetable oil. It's a product produced from waste, effectively bio-waste. And in some regions, including mine, for example, it is no longer accounted for the compliance targets, and therefore not attractive to invest in it, certainly not to be sold in Germany as an example, but to be exported in other places. So it's a holistic framework that looks at it from multi angles. But those are the key ones I put out there.
Yeah, so you mentioned one part of the framework, mandates. SAF, for anybody that doesn't know, is sustainable aviation fuel. And of course, we've had mandates, and that's, you have to produce X% of the fuel sold must be of a certain type. We've had them for cars, diesel and petrol in the past in Europe. And they turned out to be a bit of a rigid tool. They picked crop-based fuels, which turned out to be not so sustainable. and the mandates had to be radically reduced. So mandates has this problematic aspect that they're quite rigid. At the same time, they can be very good at stimulating a market because they set a target. There's other parts of the framework as well, in tax incentives and taxation, differential taxation. I don't know how you see those instruments, if there's some that are preferable to others, or what your position is right now on the mix you want in the framework.
Well, so one comment on the bio. So I agree with, but technology has moved on, and there's actually, meanwhile, bioproducts, we win from waste, which is not in competition with any food. And again, back to the regulator and legislation, if we are more flexible about the crops that we can use to drive that compliance, and less stringent, as is the case in some places now, I think we would even advocate for more stringent or more ambitious targets in that space. We need the space to comply through technology, which is available. I think that's the key point. And on your other question, I think there is different means of driving that demand and providing that incentive to the supply and demand, I should say. There's no one thing as such that I would advocate for. It varies by market to some extent. Whatever works best in a given market, in a given phase, with a given infrastructure, I think we should push for, as long as it heads for carbon neutrality eventually for the mobility sector.
Yeah, and that's core area that the ITF, the OECD more broadly, is on strong ground, that you should allow technological innovation to take you forward and try and create frameworks, whether they're mandates or regulations, that don't pick a winner early and then potentially stifle improvement or cause a retreat from a market because one particular product didn't work out. But Kees, I should let you come back on this, where you see it, what kind of framework is going to work.
Actually, I only work for the Ministry of Infrastructure, and I'm responsible for sustainable transport for 3 years. So, but maybe there is a development. 20 years ago, we started by subsidizing electric vehicles with a small portion, and the mixture of policy instruments is changing rapidly. I think now it's not a question how to push forward the first 10%, but it's how to move the last 50%. So I hope the key element in the working together from government and business is predictability. It should be predictable, so there is security in investments. And in the Netherlands, at least, and I think in other parts of Europe, we are changing the policy from subsidizing to norming and pricing. And that is more predictable than the subsidy side, because when it comes to subsidies, when the subsidy is over, well, the policy is over. But by pricing and norming, there is more security and investment security for business to invest. So I think predictability is key. And that's the first. And the second, infrastructure. When it comes to charging infrastructure, hydrogen infrastructure, the European proposals when it comes to TEN-T and the CEF financing of corridors. Well, that kind of investment in infrastructure, I hope, will give some security and some on investments or in CO2 reduction. When it comes to biofuels, I think in the Netherlands there was a huge debate on what kind of substances are used. But here, fact-based politics is very important to keep to what's true, what's not true. And nowadays, with also again with predictable, reliable policy, I hope we can invest in biofuels. So again, predictability. For me, the question is now we in the Netherlands, we always said we are techno neutral when it comes to investments. And I don't know for sure whether we can continue to have that policy, because the need for clean energy is huge for the next 20, 30 years. Not only in transport, but also for housing, for industry, etc. So for me, the main issue is what kind of sources are used for what kind of users. And maybe for the next years, there will be a shift, and government will more and more steer on, well, when it comes to hydrogen, well, you better not use hydrogen for light-duty vehicles, heavy vehicles, I don't know. For shipping, maybe yes. So we should be predictable in all senses, but when it comes to what kind of clean energy is used in what sector, I think that will be the debate for the next year, and I hope we can work together on that issue, because it's on the most efficient and effective way of using our resources.
So I very much agree with the predictability case, if I may respond. In addition, I'd say, and open to all technologies that have the potential to be secure, reliable, affordable, and low carbon. And I think as long as we are that, our job is to ensure that we identify these technologies alongside with the customer who eventually makes that choice. And I think there are some of these technologies already clearly maturing in a number of countries around the globe, one of it being electric vehicles for passenger cars, as well as for parts of the commercial transport fleets. And that's what we're investing in a number of places, including Europe, including the Netherlands and the neighboring countries. And that's a technology that is increasingly accepted, has well evolved over time, and therefore we're investing in it. And I would argue, to some extent, we don't, in this case, need that regulation and interference in terms of, make sure every forecourt carries this offer. But instead, what would really help is if the regulators and policy drivers make sure that the deployment of these chargers, building permits, access to the grid, that's what we need to focus on. That's the real bottleneck. It's not the financing. It is not the willingness of the industry necessarily to invest. It is that. And policy that removes these barriers is what we need, especially at this time of transition.
I totally agree. When it comes to for example, the charging infrastructure, we have to keep the pace of the investments in charging infrastructure with the pace of the demand. And that's our responsibility to make sure that the investments you make, that they are value for money. And when it comes to, you say, well, be open for new technologies within certain limits, and give us the flexibility to develop new techniques, to develop new ways within predictable policy. So that's, I think that today we have another discussion after this session, and this morning I spoke with some colleagues from you from another company, and what struck me is that we speak a lot about industry, but we don't speak a lot with industry. So with industry. So the discussion is, for example, in the Netherlands, was a discussion about whether we can use hydrogen in industry, but actually should be used for transport. And it was a discussion between the Ministry of Economic Affairs and the Ministry of Infrastructure. And we didn't speak with industry itself. So think whole system in the room and then try to understand each other. Where do you need flexibility? What are our boundaries? So we can work together.
Yeah, no, that's clear. There's going to be very tough competition for these combustible fuels, the new fuels that we're trying to develop, there's not going to be enough. And I think the point you made is well taken on for scale is going to be really important. So the European dimension and pushing the European space to have common policies is important. Something on the scale of the IRS Act in the US. But I think on the remaining technologically neutral, I think you better stick to that in the Netherlands because we're going to
well, actually, I think we will stick to it. But the discussion, why, if we have a certain amount of hydrogen, is it needed in industry or is it needed in transport? And those kind of questions are pretty new for the Netherlands. But we know in 2050, there will be a shortage in all sectors. So there has to be some kind of a mechanism where we say, well, which sector needs what kind of renewable energy? So, and that, I think, there will be a role for a government, and I think we have to get together and say, what do you think? What's the most? It's about the most efficient way of using all those resources. So, yes, technology. I'm not. I don't have any clue what the best solutions are, and their industry. I think they have, but we have to work together on that issue.
Was that the offer to come in now?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. First, I mean, the market also will determine who gets the hydrogen or the other fuels, who can pay the most. So in the transport sector, that's likely to be aviation. But industry may outbid aviation for the hydrogen that there is. Yeah. So that takes me to technology neutral policy. We need new ways of producing hydrogen and liquid fuels. The technology we have today, there's just not enough going to be able to produce.
And that's a key part. That's a key part of what we focus on. Hydrogen being one of the, we call it transformational growth engines, and this is going to be short, as you say, green hydrogen. So we are producing on all fronts, whether it's import, domestic production, or piped into the country. Our view on hydrogen for transport, definitely a role in long haul, heavy duty transport, to a lesser extent in light vehicles, which is more on the side of electrified, as well as passenger cars. So our take is it's more demanded in industries such as steel and cement and chemical industry. And there's a huge demand. And if you look at what the impact on climate is, focusing there relative to other technologies in the transport sector, I think is a good way forward.
Yeah, and green hydrogen's made with electrolysis at the moment. You can use that electricity unless it's in a remote place and you need to transform it to hydrogen to take it somewhere useful. Yeah. You can use it much more efficiently with direct electrification. And one of our latest publications in ITF is on electrification of trucking. And to my surprise, are the guys who are the top guys there now in the organization find that we're getting very close to commercialization of electric trucks, even for long haul. So the innovation there is taking us more quickly towards electrification there than we expected just a year or two ago.
And we share that, and this is why, as demand starts to build, we bring the supply. And I give the example of a EV truck corridor that we've built, in this case in Germany, through 3 states. It's from a European perspective, highly used route. And we've electrified that with 8 sites where big trucks can charge, actually. And the feedback we're getting is great. The utilization is low, as you'd expect with low amounts of trucks. So we are ahead of the demand, which is why we need policies to support that and encourage that. But
defining corridors. So
exactly.
The infrastructure is needed, and so you can.
And what was the financing model for that? With the German government sharing the cost of that investment with BP? I think it's BP Impulse or just Impulse that does this business.
Take that I am away, and then it's Pulse. That's what it is. And in this case, it's Aral Pulse. And yes, there is government subsidy for the investment in the infrastructure that we also use where it's applicable. There's different rules, which is not necessarily easy by state, but there is support for that, and the rest is our investment. And we take that investment from also from profits that we make with the current energy system, which is the power of an integrated energy company.
But here again, we move from subsidizing to norms. But because of the AFIR regulations, well, it is pretty clear on which corridors, with what quality, there should be hydrogen stations, electric vehicles, charging infrastructure. So we try to, then it makes it possible to scale up.
And I think Pulse is now quite successful as a purely commercial venture in providing charging stations for cars at supermarkets and standalone stations and so on. Is that purely, is it a profitable business yet? How does it work?
Well, so starting maybe at a higher level, it's one of our transitional growth engines. So we're investing in electrification of mobility around the globe, actually, in the markets that are ready to go. And target is to have 100,000 charge points by 2030. Around the globe, we've got 24,000, meanwhile, a lot of them in this part of the region. And yes, there is a utilization in line with what we expected it to be. So that's very encouraging. And yes, we are ahead of the demand, as I said, in some places. And we're learning as we are rolling out. But that is going to be a business model viable. And I think we are, to some extent, we are, if you will, privileged because we've got forecourts that customers appreciate, that they know they can access. It's ultra-fast charging, by the way. So this is, nobody wants to, including myself, spend a lot of time at a retail site. We want to get in and out quickly and seamlessly. But there's the benefit of the whole integrated offer, which is manned. There is a shop there is a car wash offer and other services. So that's really handy, and we believe there is a role, and the feedback that we're getting is encouraging. There's different missions. So there is charging missions not only on the go, but as well as destination, and all in supermarkets where I spend more time, and it makes a lot of sense to charge. So we're leaving the forecourt, if you will, and expanding also outside. But the forecourt is a sort of backbone of that offer, and that's working. Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting ecosystem. And have you got as far as bus charging depots?
Yes. The short answer is yes, and not just bus drivers, but or buses itself, but also truck charging, as I talked about, and there's clearly the demand as well as for hubs on the premises of the company itself, and there's a solution that we offer as well, and it's all interconnected. So that's really important. Make it seamless, make it available where the customer needs it.
Agustin, I know that the IDB is financing bus electrification across Latin America. Now, can you tell us how you go about it? What models work?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. This was a very interesting conversation. So what we are working with different countries, different cities in Latin America and the Caribbean. You might know the most successful cases, which are Santiago in Chile and Bogota in Colombia. They have the largest electric bus fleets in the world outside of China, and they are planning on increasing these fleets towards the end of the year. So what we do at the IDB is that, as what I was saying before, we help cities in our region to develop the regulatory framework which is needed. So, and this conversation that you were having reminds me of the last year we did a report on technological change in transportation, this digital revolution, and electrifying buses is, or electrifying the sector is a technological change. So what is needed, at the time we were thinking that when we collected interviews, data, the interviewees were going to tell us, well, what we need is financing, but no, they were requesting for regulatory frameworks that could be predictable and that they could, rely on those frameworks in order to make the investments needed. So going back to your question, Steve, we provide, of course, the technical assistance to improve the institutional capacity, and as well, one important thing is to help the cities in Latin America to design projects that can be this pipeline of projects that can be presented to the private sector for financing. And one innovative things that did, and our division chief told this example this morning in the panel, that what Santiago and Bogota did was to separate the ownership of the fleet from the operation of the fleet. And that is helping companies in Latin America, which are suffering from financial crisis, especially after COVID, to be more bankable, to have these projects be more bankable to renew fleets.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn to the audience in just a moment. You've been very patient, and I'd like to give you the chance to come in. Just on that point of separating bus operation from ownership of the vehicles, yeah, very useful for a lot of purposes, and it has liberated in previous generations the private sector to invest in renewal of fleets. In London, for example, Singapore, they've used that model extremely well, so it's good to see it picked up on, and now I think taken even to a new level in Santiago in Chile, where they probably have the best bus concession model in the world. But I think they also did a deal with the energy sector. Their electric utilities actually are making money and had some spare cash. And
they are participating. And same thing, we help in Bogota, we help build this public operator, and it's a joint ownership between the public sector and Enel, the private sector company, Italian company in energy. And one important, well, going back to make this transition also support equity and as well as road safety, one important thing that they did in Bogota is that they built this public operator fleet, which is 100% clean. So all buses are electric buses, and 1 out of 2 drivers is a woman, which is not a traditional sector for women to be involved. So this is a clear example of how we can leverage on sustainable mobility, also on clean mobility in this case, to improve gender equity in transportation.
And Enel's motivation, they're a local power distributor in Bogota as well as in
Santiago.
Italy.
Sorry, in Bogota.
In Bogota, yeah. So they're creating a market for their primary product.
It's new kind of financing models. For example, it's in South America, but also in the Netherlands. You see, we got the inland shipping companies are mostly in the Netherlands family business. It's a very small business, and they can afford to invest in sustainable maritime industry. So this is very costly, and the huge investments. And on the other hand, we've got suppliers of batteries in the harbors, and they say, well, we can deliver a battery as a service construction. So it's the same idea. It's a new way of financing sustainable mobility, and well, all in the Netherlands or all over the world, we can use new models of financing.
So I promised to open it up. We covered a lot of different things, so please feel free to come in on any of them.
Thank you. I already, can you hear? Yeah, I already know that the share of electric buses in Bogota was quite high. But I was there a couple of months ago. I was really shocked because this is real. You see them. So my question is, why this is not happening? It is happening in Chile, it's happening in Bogota, and it's not happening in Europe. Yes? Yes. Buses? Maybe in the Netherlands, but...
Okay. This is Europe.
And I can tell you it is happening in Europe as well. There is this thing, you need to ramp it up, and you need the resources, you need the permitting. I talked about that, and the grid connection. I'll give you an example. We could have rolled out twice as many charging points in the second half of last year if it wasn't for grid connection already or permitting already. That's a problem that's meanwhile addressed, and there's a response plan to that. So that will seize. And I think one of the things that will help us to gain momentum is the transferring these learnings into simplifying the process to roll it out. But there is no such thing as a resistance not to support that technology that I would sense.
Go ahead.
Is that okay? So following up on this question around an equitable transition and electrification. And so you're talking about the importance of opening opportunities for women drivers. And I represent the International Transport Workers Federation. We have kind of informal workers' unions with women leaders that are kind of campaigning for access to finance. But also just want to ask a particular question to Agustina. You mentioned the example of Bogota, where it's also an example where this, this has been going wrong in terms of this not being a just and equitable transition. So we had a campaign in Bogota, actually existing informal workers, when the new finance came in, actually lost their livelihoods because they weren't able to access finance for the new vehicles. So in terms of there being effective kind of just transition standards overseeing this whole process, do you think that we should now have these kind of written into the funding institutions in a new way? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that. And Bronwyn, if you can ask your question, and then we'll have a couple that people...
Hi, Bronwyn Thornton from the Walk 21 Foundation. I did actually have an electricity question. I'm just wondering, with household transport budgets, an increasing percentage of households, and particularly in poorer countries, people can't afford alternative modes of transport. Does electrification have an impact on the ticket price point that's necessary for bus fleets? I don't know if anyone can answer that. Is it making it cheaper or more expensive? And the second barrel, while I've got the microphone, is how do we quantify the demand for walking and cycling into the financial models that we use for transport infrastructure? Because at the moment, we've talked a lot about demand, but we always default to motorization. And I wonder if there's a means by which we can effectively build active mobility into that demand modeling.
Agustina, you can go first. Now you have time to think for about a very difficult question.
I'm eager to answer that question, but I got the hard one, so I'm going to answer the hard one.
Answer both.
So active mobility, I think that Rob provided a great example. So we need to, active mobility needs to be thought in an integrative way, right? How to provide active mobility that through funds like the one the Netherlands is putting forward for the world, but that active mobility can be linked to bus transportation or to mass transportation. Yes, of course, and the other side of that is how to improve safety, thinking from the Latin American perspective. safety is a great concern for people while walking or cycling. So, and safety can be enhanced by having separate infrastructure, for example, for biking. Also having sidewalks. I lived in countries where we didn't have sidewalks, so it's hard to walk when you are in the middle of a highway, for example, or next to buses passing right next to you. And on the other side is to many people walk. But the walks are very short, and then if we could provide also a connection, an integrated connection with bus transportation, they could, walk and then take the buses to their works. Or, but that's one part of the question and not the hard one. So for that, I do not know the example. I do not know the example that you were referring to. I do not know everything that is going on in Latin America. But with what I can assure you is that when multilateral development banks are involved in projects in our cities, we do ensure that, for example, that all the safety and environmental standards are being taken into account, and all part of that is to create employment and not to have people losing their livelihoods and on the modes of earning. So that's what I can say, but I'm happy to further speak with you after the panel.
So Nika.
Thanks. I just wanted to jump in with the perspective on the question here about the demand and quantifying and the cost. Just to say that I'm sure many stakeholders look at it from this perspective as well, but particularly from the fund and the UN, it's not just about the demand, it's also really, we're looking at what's been proven to be effective. So, fortunately, unfortunately, we have the benefit where there are higher income countries that have gone through implementing sidewalks, implementing crosswalks, implementing roundabouts instead of squares, and all the technical engineering around. I mean, you know these better than I do. But the point is, through road safety investment cases, such as ones that we funded, for example, in Zambia, there are many others that exist by the MDBs and so forth, they can actually tell you in a country, in a context, that implementing a certain, walking infrastructure, cycling infrastructure can save lives, can save on costs. And so we're driven by these kinds of evidence-based information to determine, investments in these kinds of infrastructure for that will, facilitate active mobility. Just wanted to put that out there, that it's not just about the demand, if I understood correctly. It's also really what is the science telling us about where to invest and how.
Yeah, just one bit I'd add to that. There's an exciting new project that's European Commission supported called Project Phoebe. And what we're doing there is we're using the traffic simulation models that cities use for urban planning. And typically they're always been geared to minimise travel time. That was their measure of success for the vehicle. So what we're doing in this project, it's a 4-year partnership with AIMSUM, one of the traffic simulation modellers, and a number of other companies, is to look at the road network in a city, bring in the star rating of the infrastructure and lay that out over the city, then start looking at the different traffic modelling opportunities, which includes the public transport element, the pedestrian and cycling demand creation, as well as making sure that it's safe. And the idea is that at the end of that simulation, you can have a look at what's the CO2 story, what's the percent of travel at 3-star or better, and what's the body count and injury count under each scenario. So that's exciting new work that's happening at the moment, and there'll be a number of pilot cities exploring that across Europe, but will be applicable worldwide.
Yeah, and at the basis of the financial and economic assessment, the cost-benefit analysis, it's the value you put to the journeys, usually in terms of time savings and so on. It may just be incompatible to try and use the same analysis for cars, for walking. That we faced that problem before with public transport, always coming out with internal rate of returns way below what you get from an investment in decongesting a very busy road, especially with people with high values of time, getting to work, neglecting the value of women walking to deal with all, looking after children, taking them to school, their complicated multiple journeys. There's a big mismatch in putting these very high wage-based rates on certain people. What the European Investment Bank did when they could not find enough public transport projects to meet what they were being told to do by their bosses in the European Commission was they changed the methodology, or they just changed the hurdle rate of return for the public transport policies to a lower rate than from the car road investments, so that they could spend the amount, they produce the amount of projects that they were required to produce politically. Now, they did that in a very transparent way. They didn't hide it with some cooking in the maths that nobody could see. They said, this is what we've done, this is why we've done it. Maybe that's what we have to do for active mobility. But you've got your very excellent knowledge center, Henk, sitting in the background there. Give him a contract to, or an instruction to come back with a decent methodology for getting the balance right. So we have another question here.
Thank you. My name is Vanessa. I'm from VREF, the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations. And actually, I have a follow-up question to you, Agustina, on the same topic, but I guess not so hard as his question. You mentioned that 50% of the drivers in Bogota, if I'm not wrong, or in Santiago, were women. My question is that, was that a precondition put by the bank to finance the day buses, the project, and also what levels of operation this type of precondition was established, if it was established by the bank?
Thank you for the question. So this was a project that came from Bogota directly, from the mayor of Bogota, and then we thought that it was going to be a great project to showcase in the region, and we supported it. But the condition that in Bogota said was that they had to create equal number of jobs for women and men that were going to drive the buses. And what we did, we provided funding for training these women so that they could drive the electric buses, and now we are providing more funding so that these women can become trainers of more women. And at the same time, since these women have children and have other people in their own care, the project included certain facilities like playgrounds for children so that they could take them there, and of course they would be supervised while women were working, and that also ensured that women did not resign to their jobs. So yeah, it's a great example that I really encourage everybody to take a look at. It's called La Rolita, and it's the public operator of Bogota.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think, we can take one more question, and then I was going to say that's a very nice way to wrap it up. We've come back to the equity agenda, and it's been illustrated very well. But go ahead, please.
Just not for me, the question.
You've been very patient.
Thank you very much. No, it's for all of you, but because you speak about the gender equality, I'm Chiara Corazza from Paris. I cannot resist to the invite to ask you, do you use public procurement to leverage more women entrepreneurs in transportation and diversify the supply chain? As you know, there's a huge amount of money when you talk about public procurement in this field, and you know that women have really very small portion, less than 1% in the public procurement. And are you using this tool to favor women entrepreneurship?
Yes, in the cases that we finance, for example, road projects, we do have some indicators that are mandatory, and that they say that, or when we do other type of projects to provide finance to women-led companies, we do have indicators that have to meet in order of how many women-led companies are going to be financed by our projects, and also in case of public procurement, certain amount of let's say goods or a certain amount of money need to be spent on companies that are women-led, and they provide or they supply to the building of the road.
Okay, thank you. It was a very good way to bring it back to the equitable economic opportunity agenda. So I think you did a fantastic job, covered a lot of ground. We are out of time, and I'm sure some of you have other engagements. The day's not over. So I'd just like to wrap up here by saying thank you to all of our speakers, and if we could show our appreciation to them. Thank you very much to the audience as well.